Welcome to Unstitching ADHD Urban Ed Talks. I'm your host, Dr. Stanley Ekiyor, and today we are diving deep into the intricacies of ADHD within our urban school setting. Joining us is the insightful Miss Maya Rosedale, a dedicated school psychologist working in the heart of New York State. Thank you, Maya, for accepting to join us today.
Thanks for having me.
Please, can you briefly share your background and experience?
So, I've been a school psychologist for about 20 years. I started my career a little bit later in life. It's my second career. I went to graduate school here at Roberts Wesleyan, and I got a job at Wayne Finger Lakes BOCES and started in a school for students with emotional disabilities. We had students from urban setting. We had students from Geneva and from New York City that were in therapeutic foster care. And we had students that had ADHD co-occurring with other mental health disorders. And I worked there for 6 years. And then I transferred to another program that was a little bit closer to the city, but still not an urban setting. And it was a K through 21 program for students with autism spectrum disorder. Also, a lot of the students co-occurring with ADHD. And I worked there for a while as a school psychologist and a behavioral specialist coordinator for a while. And then about 6 years ago, I came to Rochester City School District, and I've been a school psychologist there, working at Wilson Magnet High School for about 6 years.
Let's talk about ADHD. Can you give us an overview of ADHD and its impact in students in the school environment?
For high schoolers, a lot of the time, by the time they're in high school, they've already been diagnosed with ADHD. So by the time they come to us, they've been diagnosed because most of the time ADHD starts to rear itself when they're younger, 7 or 8. You might start to see the symptoms of ADHD. And that's most of the time. That doesn't say that's all the time, but most of the time, students have already been diagnosed with ADHD. So we have high school students who have either struggled through school for a long time, and some have figured it out and have figured out how to manage their symptoms and how to get through school. And some have struggled, have had trouble learning to read and struggled learning how to get things completed, homework completed, and struggled through school behaviorally. And maybe even their attendance has struggled, being able to attend to school and being able to just come to school regularly. So we see kids that have sort of figured out how to manage their symptoms, and some kids that haven't quite figured it out yet. And there's a maturity difference when you see ninth graders. So some ninth graders are really mature, and some ninth graders have not quite gotten there yet. So it's interesting to watch and the impacts that it has on different students. And then there are females who probably have gone undiagnosed because most females don't display the hyperactivity part. It may be the more inattention part. And that's just a generalization because there are females that have the hyperactivity part, but they may have gone unnoticed. And then because they're just inattentive or they're not paying attention, and they start to have trouble with maybe Regents exams or something like that. And so we start to see in high school, they're having trouble focusing, they're having trouble paying attention. And we might start to see some of those students struggle with exams or struggle with testing. And that may be coming to light as they are females that just kind of gone unnoticed as young children.
What are some of the effective strategies you recommend based on your experience for supporting students with ADHD in the classroom at that level?
So, I see ADHD as a completion problem. Like, a lot of students may have trouble with initiation, but really a lot of students have trouble completing a task. They can get started, but you may hear things like, well, I have my homework done, but it's sitting in my backpack. And for parents and for teachers, that's really frustrating. Why didn't you hand it in? And now it's even just, why didn't you press the submit button for the Google Classroom? Like, it's that simple. Why didn't you go just that one next step? And for students and young people who have ADHD, that one next step, they just lose interest, right? That next thing is the hardest thing for them to do because they've lost interest, or they've gone on to the next topic, or they've gone on to the next thing and they've forgotten to do that piece. So a lot of times parents will talk about, like, I've asked them to do a task and now they're on to a different task and they haven't completed the task. So one of the interventions that I have is basically listing the tasks out in front of them from start to finish, a checklist. So even just, what do you have to do first? What do you have to do next? And what do you have to do next? And the final thing is turn it in and then have them check it off that they've done each thing. And that includes at home. If you want the bathroom clean, even each step that needs to be done at home, have it checked off, and maybe even have a picture to go with what it looks like that needs to be done. Because they say, clean the bathroom. Well, what does that look like? What does that entail? What are the steps that are involved in that? So there's initiation of task, there's task monitoring, and then there's task completion. And those are all executive functioning skills that can be taught, but don't necessarily come naturally to someone who has ADHD. They're going to need some on-task focusing during that, maybe too, some check-ins. You're going to have to go back and make sure that they're on that list and doing those things on that list. So those things are really important. And in a classroom of 25, it may not be, I hear teachers say, well, this isn't simple. Well, everybody in that classroom of 25 would benefit from that list. Not just one kid. All the kids would benefit from that checklist and from you checking in to see where they are. So if you do it for everyone, it not just benefits the kids with ADHD, but everybody in the classroom. Teaches them organization skills, executive functioning skills that everybody needs as they grow older. But it really helps those kids who have ADHD.
Great. When you were talking, you mentioned executive functioning skills, right? For those of our listeners out there now that are wondering, what does that even mean? Can you help explain what executive function skills are?
So what we're talking about is processes in the frontal lobe. It's just like thinking through things, right? So it's the ability to take things and think through things, like that initiation, that regulation of emotions, that ability to think cause and effect, really, like what happens next when I do this. So there's behavioral pieces of it, like monitoring my emotions and my regulation of my emotions. There's task monitoring, initiation, and all those pieces that are really part of ADHD is executive dysfunction, right? So that ability to take that frontal lobe, and what that is impulsivity, right? We don't take that time to go from our fight or flight, or like our quick impulses, to our thinking brain, to our frontal lobe of our brain. And so we really have to pause and think through the processes and steps. And sometimes students and young people with ADHD have so much going on that they don't stop and think about all the steps that need to be, and they're on to the next task or the next thing, or, they have projects, a million projects or a million tabs open in on a computer. Just imagine your computer with a million tabs open, but nothing completed, right? That's the way I think about it. So executive functioning is starting, initiating the task, completing the task, and then also being able to monitor your emotions. And so when you have so many tabs open and doing all those things, you get easily irritated, right? It's easy to get irritated when you're constantly in irritated state of thinking of so many things and moving around so many things. So there's a lot going on there, really, if we think about it. I think about having so many tabs open and then somebody asking me to do something. I might be irritated if you came up to me as I was thinking about all these different things and then you interrupt that process, right? So there's got to be an empathy and understanding for what this feels like.
So now, as a school psychologist, right, you're placed in a very unique role. How do you, collaborate with teachers and other staff members. And also, let's talk about parents too, to create a supportive environment for students with ADHD. How do you do that?
I think the best thing is to understand that when we are creating things that are good for students with ADHD, we're creating things that are good for all students. So when I come up with an intervention for a student with ADHD, I try not to make it something that wouldn't be good for a whole classroom so that it doesn't seem like something extra that they have to do, that it's something that would be beneficial for a whole classroom. That if they did this, this would benefit their whole classroom. And this would be a management skill that really would teach all the kids in the classroom a skill that they all need, right? And so not only would it benefit this particular kid, but it would benefit all the kids in the classroom. So when we talk about ADHD, we talk about they need breaks, right? Well, everybody needs a break. I need a break. You need a break, right? They may need more frequent breaks, and that's okay to build more frequent breaks into their system. But everybody needs a little bit of a brain break. Younger students, older students, all students need a little break. What a ADHD brain break looks like and what a break for somebody else looks like may be different, right? But everybody needs a break for a period of time. A student with ADHD is looking for that dopamine. It's like a
Mm.
deprivation of dopamine. So they may need like some serious heavy walking or something like that. And somebody else may just need a few minutes to sit and get away from the piece of paper for a minute
Mm.
or two. So, but something that can be scaffolded but built into the whole classroom, I think is important so that it doesn't feel like an extra burden for teachers. Teachers have a lot going on. They have 25 kids to manage in a high school setting. There's 9 different teachers for one student in a high school setting. It's not like an elementary school where you have one teacher and through electives or music or whatever. So when you're talking about a high school student, it needs to be something that we can be cross too, across different teachers, that it can be easy for all teachers to do. So it becomes tricky because it could be more than 9 teachers. It could be 11 teachers because on A and B day, you could have, 2 different teachers. So it really becomes tricky in a high school setting how to do that. And the expectations are a little bit different for high school students, right? So what that looks like and how we get them to understand, yes, they still need a break, but it maybe looks like this or looks like that. So it has to be creative
Yeah.
and get teachers to understand what it looks like and get them to understand that it's good for everybody in the classroom and good practice for their classroom. And then maybe just scaffold it a little bit for a student on ADHD.
Now, from your experience, as students in the high school that you interact with, those diagnosed with ADHD, what's their level of awareness?
I think it depends on the student, right? Some of them know what it feels like, but don't know. Some of them, even adults, when we talk about ADHD, ADHD is genetic, right? So they're telling clinicians when you have a student come in to be evaluated for ADHD, you should evaluate the parent because they may be undiagnosed ADHD because 1/5 of the mothers that come in and 3/5 of the fathers that come in probably have ADHD because 50% of parents who have students who have students diagnosed with ADHD are probably have ADHD and they don't even know it, right? So a lot of people learn a lot about themselves after they start watching. And what's great about social media and not great about social media is there's a lot of stuff out there right now about ADHD on Instagram. So some students come to me and they don't know much about ADHD. And
Mm.
I point them to neuroscience stuff about Instagram and they come back and they're like, Miss, I never knew this was ADHD. And I was like,
Mhm.
yeah, isn't that interesting? I never knew that, like, when I'm watching a movie and I'm scrolling on my phone and my friends are actually watching the movie, that had something to do with ADHD. And I go, yeah, it's different how our brains work. Like we can be multiply engaged in multiple things. And some people actually sit and watch a movie and don't scroll on their phone. And they're like, I didn't know that had to do with that. And I'm like, well, it's different for everybody, but if that's you and that relates to you. So they learn things about themselves. And some of them have a good understanding. Like, I zone out or I daydream or I do this. And I ask them when I do evaluations, what does ADHD feel like to you? What does it look like to you? What is it? And a lot of them do a good job of explaining it. A lot of them, as they come into high school, have decided not to take medication anymore for whatever reason. It made me feel this way. It made me feel that way. Well, what are the things that you do to make you focus or help you focus? And they have strategies that they've developed themselves that help them. And so I make sure that teachers know what those strategies are so they can help them too. So they're pretty self-aware and they're still learning. So I think
Mhm.
they're at a point where they're beginning to understand, but still learning some things. And I can point them in directions where they can begin to learn a little bit more. And there's a lot of information out there that's pretty decent
Mhm.
on neuroscience for ADHD. And they come back, and if they're interested, they come back and they're excited to learn that that is related to it.
Good. I asked that question because I know I received a comment from a listener once that said, you know what, until she started listening to a podcast and all that, she thought she was crazy. She could not even share it with people. She knew something was wrong with her, but
Mhm.
nobody took time to say, this is your diagnosis and this is what the expectations, what you will struggle with. And this is how you can handle those things. Even though people were telling her she had ADHD, but she still could not
Yeah.
translate that into reality. So
Yeah.
I'm happy, you are taking time to give them opportunity at that level to say, you know what, go look at this. This is the resource out there. Check it out. And that I'm sure will make a lot of difference. So let's
Yeah.
talk about training and resources. So what kind of training or resources do you provide in your role for educators to help them understand and manage not just only students with ADHD, because you have different group of students in the classroom?
Right. I guess it depends on the student, but like recently somebody asked me about executive functioning and what it is and what it looks like in the classroom and what are interventions that you can use. So often what I'll do is find resources that I've used or how I've learned about it, and I'll pass them on to teachers. Sometimes I'll bullet them so that they're short and easy to read. There's really great stuff out there that's short and simple information on the internet that's good. You had to weed through it sometimes. That's good. That's based on, you know, research based interventions. And one of the best things that I think is interventioncentral.org. I go there all the time whenever I have questions about things. Jim Wright from Syracuse developed that site a long time ago. And there's all sorts of, you could just put in the behavior and what you're looking to improve, and it comes up with a list of research-based interventions that you can put in, or even if it's academic, and it'll come up with some, or if it's executive function, it'll come up with research-based interventions. So that's a great resource, I think, for in the school setting. There's also things for parents that are out there. I think there's information everywhere that's great. It can become information overload. Sometimes I spend hours and get lost in information, but and for kids, I think the great thing, and I know people don't like the internet sometimes, but short bits of information for kids, especially who have ADHD, is really helpful. And, TikTok, and there's neuroscientists on TikTok and there's
Mhm.
neuroscientists on Instagram who give short bits of information to students and young people that I think is really helpful to help them understand what's going on, in
Mhm.
little increments. 30-second or a minute and 30-second increments that gets them thinking like that young lady about,
Mhm.
hey, oh, this is me. Oh, this is a better understanding of why this is happening or what this is about me. And it doesn't really maybe fix anything except for make them feel okay about themselves. Like
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
okay. Right. So,
Mhm.
which I think is really huge because the biggest thing that I think when I see high schoolers is that they've been told if they just tried harder or if they could just sit
Mhm.
still, or if they could just whatever. And so they've gone through school hearing if they could just put a little bit more effort in or try a little bit harder, they would be an excellent
Oh,
student, right?
oh, oh,
And that's sad to me because I think they're doing the best they can, right? And they are good students. They just, they have a different way, and there's a different way that we have to draw out their intelligence. And sometimes school just isn't always set up for how they need to learn, right? So
oh, oh.
kinesthetic learning and all the ways that they need to express themselves is just not always set up in the testing way that we set school up. And so
Mhm.
it's hard for students as they come into high school who have always been told, well, if they could just sit still or if they could just, do this. And here they are in high school and they've heard that for years. And so they come to us a little saddened by the education experience, right? Really bright young people, right? Really bright young people.
Oh. And that's one thing I've always had to share with people too. You walk into some classrooms and they have those rules, right? And you're
Mhm.
looking at the rules and you're trying to juxtapose it with the characteristic of ADHD. And you're like, that is exclusive to those kids. You say you want them to sit still, they can't
Mhm.
sit still. You say want them to take turns, their impulse is just like the classroom is designed to exclude them. So right from the get-go, there's a challenge. So I agree with you totally about that. We just need to think about school design differently. Now, let's talk about accommodations and modifications, right? There are laws out there to provide some guidance on how kids like this can be supported. In your own experience, what role does accommodations and modifications play in helping students with ADHD?
Yeah. Some students need to get up, right? So they need to get up,
Uh-huh.
they need to fidget, they need to move, right? They can't sit still. They're constantly fidgeting. Even if you see students who are constantly rubbing their face or rubbing their nose, that's a form of fidgeting, right? Tapping their foot, moving constantly, can't sit still. They just need to move. And that's the need for dopamine, really. That's the ADHD is searching for some dopamine, right? So you're looking for that movement, you're looking for that. And so movement breaks are really critical. And so in a high school, what does that look like? They need to get up and take a break. They need to get up and move. And so then how do we teach high schoolers where to do that and how to get that really surge of dopamine, meaning like jumping jacks or push-ups or something like that without looking a little strange in a high school setting, right? Because sometimes it needs to be that much, right? It can't just be, I take a sip of water or I take a slow walk here. It needs to be a significant surge. And it depends on the student too and the amount of movement they require. So movement breaks are really important and what they look like and where they are and getting each individual student to understand what they need. And that takes some work. Some students will just need, like I said, those organizational skills, making sure a check in and check out, making sure that they hand in at the end of the time, whatever they've done, or task monitoring, or making sure that they have a list of what needs to be done. And those are all accommodations that can be made, in a classroom with a 504 or an IEP, depending on the need. And then some students, because they need those breaks or because they have inattention and they wander off, they may need extra time to take the test just because they take 10 minutes to think about something totally different than what the test is. And then they're back to the test. And then another 20 minutes later, they do the same thing. And so it takes them longer to complete the test because they wander off so often. So they may need extra time and then some on task focusing and prompts. And honestly, it just depends on the kid and getting the kid to understand and the adult to really get to know the kid, what they need. But those are some of the common ones: extra time, breaks, organizational skills, anything to do with executive functioning skills. for as far as accommodations and testing accommodation. Preferential seating, so seating away from noise, seating away from distractions, fidgets in the hand, just things that keep them focused.
So, what advice do you have for parents that are listening now to help them at least reinforce the support that is provided at school?
Well, while communication between home and school is really important, you know your child better than probably anybody, right? So you know what works at home. So communicating that to school is really important. I only know what I see for the 6 hours that I see your kid, and I only see your child for a little bit. And I try to get to know them the best I can, but I know that you know your child really well. So
Mm,
anything you can tell me about your child and things that work at home and how you work those at home is really important for me to know and for school
mm,
staff to know. So that communication is really important. And then vice versa, us communicating with you, right? So that shared communication is important, and trust that we're all trying to do the same thing, which is help support your student. The other thing is it's easy to get frustrated, with a teenager who has PTSD, so patient and, get yourself the support that you need, right? Because
mm,
it's not easy raising a young person, and it's not easy raising a young person who has so needs there that is not always easy supporting that. And I think the biggest thing is getting an understanding of what ADHD is yourself, right?
mhm,
And whether you have possibly ADHD too, and what you put,
mhm,
because it's understanding that this is not something that you did as a parent, that this is a genetic disorder, right? This
mm,
is genetic, right? You didn't do anything in raising your child. Like a lot of times I feel like there's a stigma that parents have done something that has
mm,
caused their child to get, and I think we're getting away from that more. But when I first started
correct.
this, there was a lot of blame on parents, like how they raised their kids somehow ended up
Mm,
being, the reason children, or they let them watch too much TV and that's why they
mhm,
have, ADHD. This is a
mm,
genetic disorder. So
mm.
you didn't do anything to
Unity.
cause this to happen, right? So don't blame yourself, don't feel guilty. This
Mm,
happens, right? And
mm,
we know you're doing the best you can. I know you're doing the
mhm,
best you can. So give yourself a
mm,
little bit of a break and
mhm,
get help if you need it, and learn more about it yourself and ask for help. I'm here to
mhm,
help and support you. There's professionals out there here to help and support you. There's information out
mhm.
there to help and support you. And I think the more you understand it, the better your patients will be too.
So, finally, do you have one last word you want to share with our listeners? Maybe something I did not ask that you would want to share from your experience that will be helpful to those listening right now?
I think that we concentrate a lot on what ADHD is as far as the bad things, right? Like that ADHD causes you not to pay attention, makes you impulsive, makes you whatever. There are some really good things about ADHD. You are quick to act in a crisis. People with ADHD think quickly, right? So in a crisis, there's nobody I would want around more than a person with ADHD because they have 50 windows
Yeah.
open and they are constantly thinking. So a person with ADHD is quick to act in a crisis
Mm,
because they're thinking fast, right? So, and that quick action, that impulsivity can serve well. There are they know a lot about things because they learn a lot about they can be hyper focused too, so they can
mhm,
learn and they can be your student, your young person when they are interested in something, they are
mhm,
interested in something and you cannot tear them away from it sometimes. So there's a hyper focus that comes that, you know, is good. Sometimes it's on video games and you don't think that's great, but there is a hyper focus. So find an interest that interests them and try to weave it into something else, because once they're interested in something, it's great. You can find it. And they may get bored of it and they may get interested in something else, but use it the best you can. There are good things about this that we can use, right? I don't think it's all bad. So there's lots of people out there that have ADHD that are really, really successful. So I just think there's a lot of positives to it too.
Thank you so much. This has been very, very insightful, Maya. Thank you for the opportunity. And I know most of our listeners would have benefited from your insightful ideas and your coming to share your experience with us, especially with the high school students. So thank you very much. We're wrapping up another episode of Unstitching ADHD Urban Ed Talks. Remember, understanding and supporting our students with ADHD is a journey we take together. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe, share it with your community. Until next time, I'm Dr. Stanley Ekiyor, and let's keep this conversation going in our schools and beyond. Stay curious and stay compassionate.